5:30. We're going to start with roll call first. I'll call your name and please say you're here. Chair Alma is here. Tiffany Edwards. Vidal Francis.
Here.
Greg Evans. Beth Blackwell.
Here.
Heather Buck. Claire Sarrett.
Here.
Gino Grimaldi. Pete Knox. Rob Zako. Scooter Milne.
Here.
Jack Boyson.
Here.
Paul Quimmery.
Here.
Sarah Mazzy.
Here.
Peter Semet.
Here.
And please let me know if I've pronounced anyone's names incorrectly. I'll get that correct. Heather Buck.
Here.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody. Now, do we have anyone for public comment? Comment? All right. Any staff updates?
Yeah, I'll provide a few. Good evening, Strategic Planning Committee. Sorry, this room setup is a little bit awkward, but I'll sit here to provide updates. And we'll have our presenters here as well. So just wanted to share a few things with the committee. So first on my list is we held a kickoff meeting today for our bus stop ADA accessibility inventory project. So I believe I've mentioned this previously. So we have a consultant team that's going to be helping us over the next 6 months or so take an inventory of all of our bus stops within our fixed route network. It's a lot of bus stops. And they're going to be going through and doing field work and looking at all the stops and getting a better understanding of what stops do we have that are ADA accessible and which ones are not, and what do they need to bring those up to our ADA standards. So we will likely have that team come to present to you in January at the January meeting. So expect to hear more about that. And just as a reminder, again, SBC and accessibility committees are combined into a single committee. So it makes a lot of sense to bring you along in that project. The second one is we launched the Transit app. If you haven't downloaded this and tried using it, I highly recommend you do so. If you're one of our regular riders, it just makes planning your trip a lot easier. And so we're pretty excited about that. We're seeing, I don't know, I was looking at the stats today, anywhere from 5 to 20 downloads a day right now. So that's pretty cool. People are using it a lot. We're downloading it. Next item, she's not here tonight, but we have a new planner on the LTD planning team. Her name is Carrie Asklar, and she's coming to LTD from the Portland area. This is just her second week, but she's going to be taking on some important project work, including the coordinated plan, which we had a presentation on last time at our SBC meeting. Speaking of the coordinated plan, that work is progressing, and we've presented to the STIF Advisory Committee once, and we'll be presenting to them again on December 2nd. And just as a reminder, we're sort of utilizing the STIF Advisory Committee as our steering committee for that project, because there's a lot of overlap between the types of projects that you consider for a coordinated plan and that we fund with STIF dollars. We'll be back to present again on the coordinated plan to this committee at some point in the spring, and that one is one we'll be seeking a recommendation from the SBC to the board to approve that plan ultimately. I just wanted to share that we do have some forward progress on some studies that we're partnering with the City of Eugene and City of Springfield on. So with the City of Eugene, we're going to be initiating a corridor study focused on River Road and Highway 99. And you might have seen, Rob Zako is not here tonight, Executive Director of BEST, but last week BEST worked with AARP and Smart Growth America to do some walk audits and then town halls on each of those corridors. So now we're going to be moving forward with the actual corridor studies. And these are LTD funded projects, but they'll be delivered by the city of Eugene. This is River Road 99W. And these will help us figure out what are the sorts of transit and access to transit improvements that are needed on those corridors. And then with the city of Springfield, similarly, we're going to be partnering with them to deliver a study on South A, which is part of the Main Street couplet in downtown Springfield. And this corridor had been studied previously. We had some grant funding left over from that previous work that we're applying to this project. So if you're familiar with South A, that's where Route 11 travels. It's a 3-lane facility that travels in the eastbound direction. And we're going to be looking at potential transit access as well. So on the Eugene projects that I mentioned, City of Eugene just posted the RFP today. So that's pretty exciting. So that one's moving forward, and I would expect the City of Springfield to post their RFP within the next few weeks here as well. So just forward there. Next one is there's a new service starting up. You'll hear more about this soon. I think we'll help promote this service, but this is called the 99 Vine. It's a new transit service that will operate between McMinnville and Eugene. So hitting all of the educational cities along the way. It'll actually also provide airport service to Eugene Airport. So that's pretty exciting. We haven't had dedicated service to the airport in quite some time. I'll share more details. We can maybe send an email out with more detailed information in terms of the frequency of service and sort of what this looks like. They're using different pots of money to fund the service. They sort of cobbled it together. So the service frequency initially will be much higher, and then it sort of drops off after the initial pilot period. Pilot dollars run out. We're coordinating very closely with them. We actually are going to have a stop right out here on Olive where they'll be able to stop and connect with our services. So that's pretty exciting. And then the last couple of things are just related to SPC. So I think you saw on January 18th, we're going to be doing a tour of LTD's services and facilities. I think we're going to likely go out to the Ride Source facility and take a tour of the headquarters there. And then Ride Transit sort of do a loop starting and ending here. And what I'd like to propose is that we do use that time as our January meeting, and then we hold a meeting, maybe an abbreviated meeting after the tour, just to kind of get everything done in one day rather than having a separate SPC meeting in the evening. So Brianna will be in touch with you about that. Is that all we need there? Okay. Reminder to SPC, if you haven't already, try to take your public meeting training that we talked about last time. We can send a little reminder about that out as well. And then lastly, just for your information, LT is looking at bylaws for SPC and the STIF advisory committee. So there could be some very minor cleanup type changes to our bylaws coming. So we'll keep you apprised of that for information. Those are my updates.
Any questions? Thanks, Steve. I just want to acknowledge Rob Zakos joined us as well. Welcome, Rob.
I'm late. Long day.
You did miss the acknowledgement of the work Best is doing. So yeah. Yay, thank you.
We're doing a lot of work, like
Yes.
the River Road Highway 99 work. Oh, thank you very much.
Yes. I just want to make sure you knew that was the top of the hour or top of the update. So all right. So if there are no other staff updates, we can move into our service policy update briefing.
So yeah, if actually Paul or Heather could come up, that'd be great.
So my name is Heather Lindsay. I'm a service planner here at LTE. And so we are updating our service policy. The last time it was updated was in 22. And so I'm not sure how familiar you are with our service policy, but we use our service policy. The service planners use it extensively, whenever we're redoing our service or adding a new route. We use it for guidance, and it has standards in there that we use it. And so we have Nelson Nygaard here, who's helping us update it. So we have Ashley Paul here, and I'll let you guys introduce yourself.
Yes, hi everyone, I'm Ashley Price, I'm with the Nelson Nygaard team, and we're based in Portland.
Hi everybody, Paul Ludi with Nelson Nygaard, Portland.
Yeah, so I think today we're just gonna kind of walk you through the work that we've done to date around some of the service policy recommendations, and just kind of give an overview of things. So kind of our agenda, just like a little bit of overview of like why have a service policy. And then some of our work was to kind of look at peers and see sort of what they're doing in their documents and kind of bring LTD maybe a little bit closer in line with what we're seeing from the peers. Then we took a little bit of a look at how some of the LTD routes are performing in terms of some of the service policy metrics and did a little review of that. So we'll share that and then end on some draft recommendations for updating the service policy document that we'd love to get your feedback on. Okay, so why have a fixed route service policy? Heather touched on this, but really it's kind of a document that transit agencies use to really define their performance standards for implementing service and also for being able to evaluate that service performance. And really the goal is to kind of baseline standards that are quantifiable, so measurable, and then things that can be replicated over and over again. And then really kind of provides guidance for how you resolve performance issues. So if things are kind of not meeting standards consistently, how do we address those routes? How do we look into them and see, what a solution looks like? And then typically service policy documents are kind of a balance of productivity and coverage. So productivity kind of focusing on frequent routes, making sure that there are bus stops near key destinations, big centers, assuring walkability around stops. You want kind of direct, simple routes that are clear lines and things that are continuous. So really kind of focus on picking up high ridership and meeting people where they are. Coverage, more about kind of serving those areas that are outside of the more productive routes. And so really more aimed at meeting a community need, maybe serving a more rural area. It has maybe more of a geographic need, geographic reach, and it's not necessarily a city center kind of. So that's kind of like also the sort of balance that's at play in LTD service policy. And then a little bit of just our sort of work here. Heather mentioned this too, but the last fixed route service policy was updated in 2022. So for this sort of iteration of the work, we're really looking at integrating anything new that LTD has been working on, some new policies, new initiatives. So things like some stop balancing work and some Title VI work that we worked on in the past, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then also really, like I said, looking at how LTD compares to some of the peer transit agencies and kind of bringing those performance standards in line with what we're seeing from peers, making sure things feel realistic and attainable. And then doing a little bit of an update of the document, maybe making it a little more graphic and refreshed. And then just some other things that we're thinking of evaluating or looking at kind of in the course of this work. Like I said, how is LTD performing against its current goals? And taking a look through the document and trying to see, like, are there any standards that are in there now that feel too complicated, that maybe they're not using that much? They're maybe too onerous to kind of like consistently track. And should we update those? And then are there any kind of new policies or standards that should be changed? So that's kind of the gamut of things that we're covering. And then lastly, just a little overview of the project timeline. So we kind of kicked off in August and had a few meetings with the LTD team just to kind of share our initial findings and get some feedback on sort of the shape of our work. So now we're kind of meeting with you all at this first SPC meeting. And then our goal is to kind of take your feedback and to take any other feedback from the rest of the LTD team and make those kind of graphic and text updates that we'll share with you again in January when the document is a little more polished, and then aim to kind of wrap up this work in February of next year.
Is this something that goes to the board for approval, or is it an administrative action that we're advising staff on this?
Just ultimately goes to the board.
Okay. Then I'm not seeing the timeline when that would be.
It's sometime after January.
Okay, off the map.
I mean, it could be February, it could be March. There isn't like sort of a critical.
Okay, I'm just not seeing there, so, okay.
Sometime in the spring.
Thank you.
Okay. So like I said, one piece of this body of work was kind of looking at some peers as case studies. We kind of talked with the LTD team about sort of what the right mix of peers was, and came up with this list. So we've got Chariots, we've got UTA in Salt Lake City, we've got Spokane, TriMet, and Transport in Fort Collins, Colorado. So those are kind of the list of peers that we're working with throughout these studies.
I'm assuming that group is comparable to the size, operational depth of this.
Yeah, we looked at peers for size, for sort of college town similarity.
Thank you.
We're smaller than TriMet, of course.
Well,
Yes.
yeah, and I think we also threw in TriMet being maybe a little more inspirational,
Yeah.
bigger, they have a wider mix of services, so kind of have a balance there, but most of the other ones I think are, kind of trying to stay at the LTD size.
Did you look at the revenue side of it too, in terms of comparable to what LTD is?
Not necessarily
Didn't know.
revenue, right?
Just thought. that's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna, these next slides, I'm just gonna walk through some of the sort of comparisons between what we're seeing with LTD and with the peers. This one very high level, LTD kind of tracking 13 performance standards, and that's kind of in line with the average number of standards that we're seeing tracked by the other peer agencies. There's like maybe a little bit more room for LTD to talk about how sort of land use and demographics play into the service planning process, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth in a while. But also just we're seeing like the service policy documents and how they look vary widely by agencies. You know, some are more graphic, some just have kind of like different looks and feels, and so that's another thing that we're gonna be trying to work on with you all, kind of right sizing how much we change the look of this service policy document. So one of the first things we looked at, kind of just frequency standards, and you'll see kind of LTD standards highlighted in that blue column, sort of different standards by route types, and sort of like, compared to the other agencies. Just a quick snapshot. And so kind of general findings here, all of the agencies are kind of categorizing frequent service 15-minute maximum headways. One thing that was sort of interesting with LTD is they set kind of like a target frequency or desired headway, but also for frequent service allowed up to 30 minutes. So the desired frequency was kind of 15-minute headways, but the maximum allowed was 30-minute headways. So kind of like a big gap to still be considered frequent, and maybe a little bit larger than the sort of allowances that we're seeing from other peer agencies. And then sort of for other route types, so non-frequent service route types, there was a little bit more of a range in the allowed frequency. So there was a desired range, but for like a rapid bus, the maximum allowed headway was up to 1.5 times more than the preferred headway. And for an express bus, the maximum headway was up to 5 times the preferred headway. So a lot of range is sort of what we're allowed to see in frequency. And so there are reasons to do that, obviously kind of setting aspirational targets, but meeting sort of the realistic service performance elements. But, you know, maybe an opportunity to kind of simplify the ranges there to make it easy to track.
Sorry, were you saying that that for LT, the ranges are considerable? Was that LTDs or those are other?
Yeah, LTD's ranges are considerable and also kind of complicated based on, or different based on route type.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with what a headway is.
So that's like the desired time between buses, spacing.
Arriving at a
Yes.
stop.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Oh, I was pointing at folks, sorry,
Okay.
trying to direct.
So yeah, so kind of, yeah, just a sort of a range of frequency allowed going on here. And so maybe an opportunity just to simplify here. The next thing we looked at was on-time performance. There's sort of a 90% on-time performance standard for LTD. And that's like between 0 and 4 minutes after the scheduled departure time. And so generally kind of in line with what we're seeing from peers, sort of like 85, 90, 100, sort of the general range for other peers.
Was there anything about UTA that explains 100% on-time performance?
Nothing about why. I mean, it's like an ambitious target, so maybe that's just their motivation.
Oh, sorry, that's standard, not what we do.
And then the other thing we looked at was productivity. So LTD's standard is kind of in this top box. And so a route will be considered substandard if ridership productivity is less than 67% of the average of other routes within its specific route category. So sort of a route-based performance standard and a bit relative. I think, you know, it could make sense, but what we're seeing from some of the other peers is that there really is just sort of a ridership per revenue hour standard that's kind of flat. So for Chariots, you know, for corridor route, 20 rides per revenue hour. And so maybe there's an opportunity to kind of simplify the productivity standard as well to make it less relative and easier to track. Other things we looked at, more of the kind of design pieces were stop spacing standards. And so again, this is kind of just a snapshot, generally kind of quarter-mile recommended spacing, which is in line with what we're seeing from the other peers. Yeah, so this is kind of just another kind of way to flesh some of that out. Generally, we're seeing quarter-mile stop spacing for local and standard bus routes. The other things that were sort of interesting is that some of the other peers didn't include stop spacing standards in their guidelines. So Transport, for example, didn't. TriMet doesn't define stop spacing standards based on route type. They really only focus on that for their FX service or their sort of rapid service. And so there's kind of like a bit of a range there, but I think generally good practice to define it. Just kind of like a flag of what we're seeing from other folks. And then the other piece is amenities, so things like benches and shelters at bus stops. Again, the LTD standard in the blue on top. So for bench placement criteria, you want to see kind of 15 or more daily boardings at stops. And then for a shelter, 30 or more daily boardings. LTD kind of slightly higher on the bench placement, sort of in the middle or in line for the shelter placement criteria. But that's like something to consider, maybe sort of bringing that standard to be a little bit more in line with peers on bench placement. And this kind of defines that as well. One thing to flag is that, you know, Chariots, UTA, a few other agencies kind of like explicitly note that they sort of set their shelter or bench placement guidelines based on sort of older people, riders with disabilities who are near the stops and sort of what those uses look like. LTD kind of tracks lift usage. So that does factor into the bench and shelter placement, but maybe some room to sort of have more of a methodology around that or be a little bit more explicit about it in the service policy document. And then finally, just kind of like some things of note, seeing some other kind of elements or considerations from other peers. So looking at things like population and employment density, some of the service area characteristics, so things like the age, what the vehicle usage in the area is, making sort of transfers better timed, and then also tracking things like sort of minority areas and bringing in a little bit more of an equity consideration to sort of how routes are tracked. And so that's something that, you know, might be of interest, is like sort of maybe a more of an equity component and incorporating that into the service policy document. But I think obviously that would require coming up with a little bit more of a tailored methodology, but something that we're seeing from other agencies, particularly TriMet. So that's it on kind of just like the peer review piece. And the next piece was kind of us taking a look at existing sort of performance of LTV routes and doing a little bit of analysis of how they're tracking against some of the standards. So so the first one was the on-time performance standard. So again, it's at 90%, that sort of blue line on top. Most of the routes kind of meeting that. Those 5 routes in yellow are the only ones that are kind of falling below the on-time performance standard. Paul, do you remember which route types those were?
Yeah, there's, it's a mix. MX, you've got a couple rural routes, you've got a couple basic routes. So, but we were seeing that they were really close, with the exception of the 8, which is the Cottage Grove route. So it's kind of like, you know, we didn't see anything shattering here, and that 90% is pretty good. Yeah, it's a little higher though than some of the other agencies that drop it down to 85. 85 is kind of like a standard across the industry. So having 90% is, I think, it's aspirational, but it's good. People like things to be on time.
Well, it's aspirational, well, they're also meeting it.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So why not
Yeah.
continue?
Mm-hmm. The other one we looked at was missed trips. The standard here was kind of the number of missed trips less than 0.5% of total trips operated. This one, you know, far kind of surpassing that goal, so nothing sort of note here. But you know, good to keep up.
The standard's up at 0.5% and the actuals are barely visible, most of them down there, except for MIK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Can you go back to the first chart? The range or the X values at the bottom, is that similar to the X values on the previous slide? Are we looking at the same group of, is it the same? No, it's mixed up. So it's different. Okay. I thought we were looking at the same ones in the same placement.
Oh, the routes or?
Right, correct,
Okay.
the routes. I'm sorry.
Sorted in order of decreasing performance.
Mhm.
Oh, I see.
But all the same routes, yeah. Mhm.
Can I just ask, maybe Heather, what would cause a missed trip? What are some of the causes?
Accidents, bus broken down. That's the big one.
Just to make sure I understand.
And the other kind of the big one that we looked at was frequency. And so, you know, we talked a little bit about the kind of like desired and then sort of maximum allowed. So that's kind of onto the side of the pink bars. But also LTD kind of tracks frequency performance across several time periods. So you've got sort of AM peak, midday, PM peak, and evening. And so, you know, what we're seeing for the AM peak, for example, you've got almost half of the routes not meeting their sort of lowest target. And then sort of better performance from the midday and the PM peak and evening. But also a thing here to notice kind of like that multiple tracking across sort of different standards. Maybe there's an opportunity here again to sort of simplify the frequency tracking to make it easy to understand sort of which routes are actually meeting the targets and which are not. Sort of a lot to parse through.
Okay, so the last one that we looked at was productivity, and if that wasn't, we didn't say it earlier, this is basically how many passengers per hour of service are you operating? It's kind of weighted normalized ridership. So these are your existing route categories. So BRT, college, community, core, express, limited, and rural. So you've got a lot of route categories. Many of the peers don't have that many. TriMet only has 3. But what we're showing here is weekday, Saturday, and Sunday. It's probably a little hard to see, but the weekday is on the left-hand side for each route. So there's a lot going on this graphic. But essentially what we wanted to do is to show using the existing standard, which is that 67% threshold. So if it's below 67% of the average of all the routes in that group, then it's considered substandard. But that really only, in your current service standards, really only applies to the ERT college core routes. So those routes that are really more focused on productivity. Point of all this, and then when we looked at this, there's only a few routes that are below that threshold, and they're not, you wouldn't really do anything with the standard because they're the community routes and rural routes. So the goal of those routes is not productivity, it's about coverage and providing service to the community. So this is just kind of a, this was one of the things that we'll talk about when we get to recommendations that we felt like can be simplified a little bit. So it's kind of a hard concept to say a relative standard for that route type is like, yeah, it's not typical. We didn't see it for any of the other peers.
Question? Just a question. Could those routes be under a different policy? It's just a thought.
Yeah,
okay?
so
and I could be off base here.
No, that's actually
it's just a thought.
It's a really good thought.
What I do love about this is the fact that, again, ridership, folks getting on there, it's not just how many people you serve, but there's a quality part of it too, where you got folks that are way out where that they do need that ride. And I love the fact that that is trying to be addressed too as well. But could they be looked at from a different policy that would help them be more objective and trying to even promote themselves or whatever?
That's a great question. Yes, and so we are suggesting some consolidation of how these routes are categorized, and how they're categorized means kind of the function of that route. So I think we'll answer your question when we get to some of the recommendations. Yeah, and the other thing is that when we look at productivity, for example, it's not the only thing that LTD is going to be looking at when they're evaluating routes. It's one piece of it, but when you look at an individual route and you think, well, does it fit in the category? What's the function of that route? We'll talk about that in just a minute. Yeah, so I think we'll answer your question. That's a great question.
Can I just sort of preview briefly?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I'm looking for your recommendations. I'm trying to understand how all this connects to the potential rider experience. So if you can help us sort of connect that to me as a rider as we go through, that'd be really helpful. We can talk about that.
So I think all of these standards, like things like frequency, things like stop amenities and where they're placed and how closely they're placed, that all is kind of like rider experience, right? How long
I
are
get
you
that.
waiting for the bus? Okay, sorry. Yeah.
But I'm not sure how the technical details of what you're recommending versus what was, how does that make a difference to me as a rider? And I'm just not smart enough to sort of make that connection. So if you can help me make that connection, that'd be helpful.
So I think that the intention of this document there may be a little bit more that's like internal to LTD about how they are tracking how routes are performing. And so them making it easier for service planners to track how routes are performing to make sure that those kind of rider facing things are being met. So I think that's kind of the maybe more of the intention.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that answer your question or?
Well, we'll have a discussion. Go ahead with the recommendations. I'm learning.
Okay. All right. So the first one that we wanted to focus on is productivity. So productivity, think as it relates to passenger, is also what that route is for. Is that route really focused on generating a lot of ridership, or is it about providing service coverage to? And LTD has a mix of different routes throughout the network that do that. So our recommendation is basically to simplify this a little bit, and rather than use the relational threshold that we currently have, which is that 67% of the average of that route type, is just to focus on how many rides per hour of service that route is generating. In other words, how much, how productive it is in terms of, now, when we get to the next slide, we'll kind of talk about this a little bit, but many of the standards vary kind of by agency, but all of the peers that we looked at use this like fixed number of passengers per hour to do that. So this is just an example of transports. And the other thing that we liked about transport that we wanted to show here is that they also have some different things that the agency does if that route's not meeting its performance standards. So we'll talk about the recommendation there. Yeah, so maybe the next slide. So this is kind of a busy table, but essentially what the recommendation is basically to simplify it. Couple of things, and maybe this answers your question related to kind of what the route is intended to do, but we have consolidated, or we're recommending that some of the routes be consolidated into different route categories. So Route 55, which is currently a limited route, there's no other route in that category. We felt like it could be consolidated into other routes that we have. And I know Route 55 is a little bit different than some of the other routes, but it fits more in the community category, we felt. Route 24, we felt like was really more of a core one. So that was, we're making a couple of suggestions about consolidating some of the route categories. And then you only have one route that fits in the express category, the 79X. I know you used to have other routes that fit in that category, but 79 is the only one. So we felt like it could be consolidated into a college route category. So just again, it's the recommendation here is really about simplifying it for LTD staff to be able to evaluate routes that are meeting the standard or exceeding the standard or not meeting the standard. So kind of simplifying it in that way.
I'm assuming too, with that recommendation, those routes to some degree fit the, I would say, expectation or somewhat the expectation of being a community route or a core route. In other words, when you go to those other routes that are actually core routes, they have certain characteristics, and this recommendation would actually fit that characteristic to be placed in that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're just trying to match the numbers, trying to.
No, I think it's like, right, trying to right size the route based on what we're seeing from the service performance. And so, you know, if we're seeing kind of lower ridership, but we recognize that it's like serving a coverage function, okay, maybe that is a rural or community route. And so then also the way that we evaluate that route changes, right? We're not looking at productivity sort of as the key driving factor. We're looking at the coverage as kind of like the more prioritized to consider. So the way we're kind of evaluating the routes also changes.
Yeah, so maybe if we go to the next slide, I think that might be a better way to, at least in my mind, to explain it. So the standards that we set, it's easier to point, is in 4 different categories. One is just sort of the standard, which is the blue. And then kind of like what transport has done, they have sort of different categories. And so if it gets to kind of a slightly lower level, we felt like it was good to have a standard that is more like, monitor this route and to see like, you know, is there something you could do? If it gets below this red line, and you can see none of the routes in these categories are below that red line. But if it does, there's really something going on there, right? And so that's really kind of, you take a little bit more drastic action for those routes. Now, the other thing I should have said at the very beginning is the way that we've grouped these with the BRT, which is just the MX, core and college routes, the function of those routes are really more about productivity and less about coverage. Now, they're still providing coverage, but the real focus of that route is about productivity, getting people on the bus as much as possible. The rest of the routes, community routes and the rural routes, that's not really their intended function. Their intended function is to get people on the bus, but it's really about providing coverage. And so this is sort of maintaining that split that you have in your service policy with that. So you have different approaches to what happens if a route drops below a standard or gets to these different thresholds. If, depending on if they're in this category, which is really more about productivity, and this, they're more about coverage. So hopefully this helps to explain it a little bit, though there was no real like magic, quite honestly, to where we set these numbers. We did base it a little bit on the routes that are in that category to make sure that they're, more or less where these routes are currently performing. We had a sort of an aspirational number to say that if a route is beyond that, like you can see the 11 on the weekdays is, performing kind of a very baseline of what MX is doing. So you might want to, on weekdays, at the 11, say, are there improvements to the 11? So yeah, and then for the community and for the rural routes, again, the function is a little bit different. It's a little bit more about coverage. And it's much more about coverage than it is about ridership. So we still have standards, but if you drop below this, that doesn't mean that these routes go away. It just means that, LTD staff, this is basically a way for LTD staff to evaluate the routes and understand, is it meeting their intended function of these routes? And I think hopefully that relates to what that service means to the passenger. So I know this is a little bit technical, but it's really primarily about making sure that these routes are meeting goals of the agency goals. So,
I'm sorry, you go first, man. I got two.
Oh, no, you're good. To clarify, this is what the new categories you guys are proposing?
So these are the recommended categories. Yeah. And the big changes that we suggested is putting the 79X into the college route categories, putting the 55 in the community category, and moving the 24 from community route into the core routes. And primarily because 24 is doing pretty good in terms of ridership.
Yeah.
Vidal, and then you first, and then.
Good graph. I understand it all. I kind of see it all. This is great. It kind of actually sums it up, puts it together.
Okay.
The one thing I don't see, I see the yellow line, which is the monitor. That's for the express, I guess, the core and college. But what about the community and rural?
Yeah, I think we debated about that. We felt like the difference, we didn't feel like we could have one in the middle. And again, I think the reason why we didn't do one here is that these routes you kind of approach differently. If we could go up one slide.
back.
Yeah, thank you. So within that, we felt like that these are sort of the actions that you would take if a route isn't meeting the, if you're at that level. So if you're at the standard, you don't necessarily need to do anything. That route's doing what it needs to do. We felt like the monitor didn't really need to be there for the community rural routes because it's the function of those routes is different. And it was pretty close to between the 5 and 10 passengers. So it's pretty similar. But I did want to point back to these things that if you're in that exceeds category, we're suggesting that, look at frequency improvements. There's a lot of people using that route. There could be issues in terms of the passenger with overloading or missed trips or you're not able to get as many people on the bus because there's so much ridership on that route. And then for the monitor category, it's really just, if you're there, that, consider like potential changes. It's not that these are definitive, that you have to make changes. It's really more about giving guidance and some structure to how you're evaluating. And it's, again, we're trying to feel as complicated, but I think it's a little bit simpler than looking at it the other way. And again, it's kind of more comparable to all of the peers.
At least what I like about what you just said there, it gives us room to, if we need to make changes, we could make those changes, or let's just say room to think about how we want to make changes rather than just for correction.
That's right.
Rob?
I appreciate this effort. I think I understand it's primarily for staff. It's a tool for staff to monitor how the system's doing and to serve people better. I'm going to continue looking at it from the point of view of users though. So productivity, I'm a rider. I don't care about productivity. Or if I do, I want less productivity. Productivity means a more crowded bus. I'd rather have a less crowded bus, less productivity. On the other hand, if I'm a taxpayer, I want more productivity. I want my taxpayer dollars moving more people. So just sort of some context there of, what this means to people who are ultimately being served by LTD.
But I think, yeah, that's a great point. And I think that that's kind of a little bit of what we're trying to get at, for example, for like if a route is exceeding its productivity target, that means that, yeah, you might actually need to be adding more service.
It's too crowded.
Yeah, exactly.
More
It's too
buses.
crowded. People can't get on the bus. People are waiting for buses because they can't get on. And so, yeah, maybe that does mean the route it's in a different category and so it gets treated differently. So yeah, you're running more service, maybe you're changing and upgrading stops, things like that. So yeah, it's a tool for like, yeah, if we're seeing sort of routes consistently exceeding or falling below their targets, then there's an intervention that means like, okay, this needs more service or it needs less service.
If you're looking for feedback, I mean, this looks fine to me. But you might include in the document sort of those connections to the outside real world and not just to what's internal to LTD and but what it means to different stakeholders in LTD.
Yeah, that's great.
That makes sense.
So question between the difference between core and college, because they share the same productivity standard. College service, we're not getting that on the weekend. Are there other differences that we're considering between these two categories? I just wanting to understand the differences.
No, I think that was kind of it, is that they've been categorized that way before. We didn't feel like there was a great reason to not keep a college category. The seasonal variation in routes is another reason to keep it. So these are averages. This is for a whole year. So that's why and I know they're the same standards, but we felt like it was important to just keep them separate. They are different in the way that they operate and when they operate, and they're
Sarah?
there's no magic there really, other than to try to preserve that category.
But given the seasonality of the ridership on college, like is taking a year-long average the best way to evaluate the productivity of a route that doesn't see a lot of ridership 3-4 months out of the year?
Right. That's a good.
I mean, I think within that particular category, I think it works because you've consolidated the college routes, and it's U of O plus LCC. So the fact that they do have a very unique service profile, and then you're looking at that as a unique category, I think that solves for the year annualized.
I guess what I'm concerned about is by using a whole year of data for the college routes, is that
Fair.
Yeah, like, I mean, if we're way below average in the summer and then productivity is like skyrocketing through September through December, is an annualized average a fair way of looking at it? Because it could be that when college route, like, it could be needing more service during school year and less service during the summer. So
Well, and you look at the 79, I mean, it is kind of like one of the highest ridership routes. That's a good point. One thing I think maybe we should talk about is if it makes sense to evaluate it slightly differently for those college routes. And that's one of the reasons why we want to keep this separate also, is because we have different frequency standards for those route categories. So that was another reason, but yeah, that's one thing we could consider.
Yeah.
As we look at the update here.
I think Sarah and then Vidal, did we?
That was my same question.
Okay, Vidal.
We do have a hand up on the screen.
Oh, thank you for catching
So-
that.
But I'll let her go first.
Okay, Scooter and then Vidal.
I just wanted to put in I guess, positive word about the not including the monitor threshold for the community and rural routes. I think that's a good decision because, as has been stated several times already, you can't really measure them by quite the same metrics now. I'm dependent on one of those routes now, so I'm seeing that firsthand. So yeah, just I do think it's a good idea to keep those in separate categories and maybe measure them a little differently for some respects.
Thanks, Scooter. Vidal?
I was just gonna follow up on Paul's comment. If the objective here, or part of the objective here, is to come up with a good policy, which will be functioning year-round or throughout some extended period of time, and if we go and we break it out by the 6-month, by 8-month increments, that would almost mean that our policy, and I could be wrong about this, we would have to have maybe 2 or 3 sets of policies to account for those different types of situations. You know, I don't know if you follow what I'm saying there.
I think I do.
And so if you do look at it as a year thing, obviously the objective is trying to get one policy that would handle everyone. But if we break it up, which we can do, that also mean that in that policy, we would have some if and then statements going on. If we see this, we need to do this. That would probably help offset what could be happening at that moment in time.
Yeah.
But then again, I could be way off base here, but that's just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think
Trying
that.
to consider what Paul was saying.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. I think, right, like the intent here was kind of to just standardize the evaluation, but like, yeah, with a college route that has a very specific seasonality that you're not seeing in the other route types,
Right.
there's a little bit of room for nuanced evaluation there.
Yeah, I mean, you already made an exception by not putting monitor in community and rural, right? So if you chose to have a different calculation for the college route, it's simply an asterisk.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a whole new policy.
Could I just ask a clarifying question? I still am kind of lost on this because we've got college routes in their own bucket. They have their own thresholds to compare against each other. There's a couple that there's like the 85 maybe is performing a little bit lower than we would want, but they have like what does that get us to have break it out by season for these ones?
Well, I think if you go back to Rob's initial kind of setting the table, what's the actual rider experience on the ground? And what Paul is saying is, perhaps while university is in session, there are bus routes that are heavily utilized.
The concern is
And this
crowding.
wouldn't,
It might be like.
calculating this way wouldn't
That's helpful.
capture that.
I wasn't picking up on that. The concern is crowding.
Yeah, specifically like low ridership in the summer, bringing the
Yes,
average
bringing the
down and
average
therefore not triggering an
We do
evaluation.
have, we haven't talked about it tonight, but maybe you want to share about our bus capacity.
Well, go ahead.
Well, we do have it is in here, actually have the service policy in front of you, so you can dig into this, but we do have some guidance on crowding. It's a separate topic. So I think if we could sort of separate these things and use this recommended approach for monitoring productivity, but still having the bus crowding methodology to understand crowding as a connected but kind of separate issue, I think is probably a cleaner way for us to go. Then, because one of the things we're trying to do here is we've got a little bit of a convoluted system right now for measuring productivity, and we're trying to simplify this. And I would prefer if we don't add more layers of complexity to this part if we have another tool to do crowding. So,
Well, I'm definitely supportive of simplifying the process.
I agree with what you just said. If I'm a rider, I don't care about sort of the average crowding. I care about the fact that this day I need to get to class. I can't get on the bus because there's no room. It's more an on-time performance kind of thing of are you above or below a threshold?
yeah,
How often?
or
So that's good.
having people not have capacity to actually get on a bus. That's a big problem.
Right.
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 So we have other tools for that. So again, for productivity, I think if we kind of stick with this basic framework, and again, it's not, as Paul was alluding to, it's not totally prescriptive for us. It's an indicator so that we can use this as an evaluation tool and think about what kinds of mitigations might to deal with the productivity sort of connected but separate from crowding.
Yeah, and I think to follow up on what Dave just said these are just some of the things we're recommending changes to. The rest of the policies, of course, it's in place. And as the service development team looks at the routes, gonna be using all of these things, so. Yeah, I do think, I mean, I look back at transports, they do have sort of a range for their university routes. But I think that it probably won't really change how these routes are evaluated. What will change is if the passenger load threshold is being constantly probable, if on-time performance is low. So that would flag these routes for evaluation or improvement.
And real quick, we did this last time we did the policies in 22. So I imagine we go through, we're gonna resegment, look at things a little bit differently, give it a couple years and be like, okay, now how else, so there's, it's an evolution process as we go through this, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, just to give you a preview, I mean, this is the fixed route service policy, and of course, we do have some other types of services. And one of the things we've talked about is we're not proposing to do this right now, but in the future to sort of have this be more expansive so that it's inclusive of like on-demand type services if we do go that direction on a larger scale in the future. So this isn't, something we do once and we never touch it again. We do revisit it from time to time.
Keep moving here. Okay, so for the frequency recommendations, basically what we're suggesting is that many of the peers use kind of a single maximum allowed headway that they measure their routes with. They don't have, as you saw that one chart we showed for the AM peak, midday, it's pretty complicated. And to be able to evaluate, to have standards for different kinds of frequency at different times of the day, it's just, is complicated, and my guess is probably isn't always used. And as we saw, many of those are not, at least during the AM peak, are not meeting those standards. So our recommendation is really about simplifying this and setting sort of a minimum standard for each route type, and then having sort of like an aspiration, so having a range within each of these route types and simplifying it. So next slide summarizes this. Okay. So we do still feel like, because you have like different time periods throughout the week and weekday, we recognize that peak and midday, there's sort of there can be a difference there. So that's why we wanted to suggest having a range of headways. The one thing that's sort of we're seeing as we're coming out of the pandemic now, as ridership is kind of stabilizing a bit, is that the AM peak is a little bit lower than it used to be. We're not seeing as much peak in the AM, again in the PM. So really the midday is when ridership and frequency needs to be there to improve the passenger experience. So we're suggesting that kind of the range between midday peak could be, we could have sort of a range between those. And so that doesn't mean that the AM peak has to be the same as PM peak. So you could have a range there, and that's, so again, this is really about simplifying it. And we did the same thing for all of the different routes. So you can see as we go down to the community routes, it's kind of a range between 30 and 60 on the weekday, 60 on the weekends. This is where the college routes come in, because we did have a different peak, weekday and weekend headway here, and recognizing that the weekday is much different, really do. And this is another one of those things that we want to make sure that the frequency of that service corresponds to the demand. So that's why we have to range. And it doesn't, it's not always the same. So again, we just felt like this was a way to simplify this categorization in terms of frequency. And then the rural routes, of course, would still continue to be variable. Anyways.
Real quick, could you just define the time period for peak, midday, and evening?
Peak would be starting in the morning between, say, 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. That's usually the AM peak. The PM peak is usually between 3 and 6 p.m. And then the midday between that. So 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then evening is usually anything after 6 p.m. So we will add that to the table.
That's a question. Just looking at the BRTMX, I'm trying to remember what we discussed when we talked about this in our staff meeting, but and maybe Heather, you can help me with this. What's the worst headway on the MX right now? Is it 30?
It's 15, but if
The
you do the
worst headway?
gateway, loop, it's 30 minutes.
So it's inclusive. So that's what I thought. So we have a portion of our MX route out in Springfield, right? Is that International Way?
Yeah.
That way where we're at
Gateway loop,
30.
Gateway loop, yeah,
30 in the evenings.
all day,
Oh, all day.
first Saturday, Sunday,
So
and then 8 weeks, yes.
we might want to maybe revisit that, because just BRT in generally, 30 minutes would not be an ideal. But we do have an exception for that one little part.
Oh, so it's just that one route?
Yeah, so we skip a bus.
Outlier.
Yeah, it rotates which direction it goes, yeah.
So we might want to talk a little bit more about that, because 30 is not a very aspirational target in general, yeah.
Yeah, that might be an asterisk, I think, probably for that, but the rest of the main route from, Gateway Illinois.
Sarah, and then.
Yeah, I mean, also, I guess this is the opposite issue, but the 55 is a community route now, right? And so that would just not meet that standard, and that just would be accepted, or?
Yeah, I think this, yes, that's right, and maybe it's just a caveat. I think that we could add some asterisks here and add some explanation to those unique routes, but that's always gonna kind of be the case. I think it's good to still keep the 55 as a community route for the productivity and for the other reasons, but it's.
I guess this is kind of a question for the whole table. So we have 4 college routes. Which one of those services LCC?
All the 81, so 81, 82, 85.
Okay, so the 380s go to LCC and the 79X, that's the one that goes kind of from Chase Gardens to, okay. Do we see higher nighttime ridership on the LCC routes compared to, no, it's about the same, okay.
Not a lot of people ride the evening trips on the 80s.
Okay.
Might keep going. Am I gonna do the stop spacing? Okay, all right.
So the next 2 recommendations, sort of less kind of about the sort of technical evaluation ones. These are more about some past work that Nelson Nygaard has done with LTD around stop spacing and around Title VI. So this one, the recommendation is more simply just to kind of update the language around stop spacing that's in the document. So just a little bit more sort of clarifying like what is stop balancing and sort of how and why an agency would want to consider right-sizing stops. Too many stops make the bus too slow, but too few stops makes the rider experience poor. So just talking about sort of those considerations, and then just kind of having maybe a graphic that outlines the stop scoring methodology that we came up with, and sort of just like, integrating that into the document so folks are kind of aware of how LTD is considering stops.
Claire?
So in the, when you were going through some of the peers, I believe you mentioned for stop spacing, there was also in some places, consideration of land use. Did you discuss that as a addition? Did you debate whether or not to make a recommendation around that?
So I think it is a recommendation we would make. I think there's like a little bit more evaluation that we would need to do just on sort of like right sizing the recommendation to the LTD service area. So I think it makes sense, but a little bit outside of the scope of this work. But yeah, something that, I think it's good to consider for future updates, but with a little bit more analysis.
Yeah, because I think it's going to become more and more important going forward.
And one thing we did do as part of this process was basically come up with a kind of a methodology for how to evaluate a route. And land use was a piece of that. So as we're, as part of the methodology, we didn't do it. part of this, but that is one of the sort of evaluation criteria you would look at. If you're looking at a stop, like, what's the land use around it?
Sure,
What's the ridership of it?
but it's not part of the policy, service policy.
Well,
document.
there's a component of it because it's a separate methodology that we developed as part of the system review.
Okay.
So we will reference that document.
Okay.
Within the service policy, but
And I'm gonna be super mindful of time. We can cut back in other areas. This is for the whole group. We have about 5 minutes on this topic, but we can kind of push along too if we need to for others.
Sure, slides. To the next one. This is, and so the next two are sort of quick, the same sort of thing, kind of building on sort of past work that we did at LTV. And this is really just updating the Title VI language that's in the document, so not making any changes really to the methodology. But, you know, I think the existing document has sort of a definition for disparate impact, but not disproportionate burden. And that's something that we've seen sort of consistent among peers. So just adding that language to the document. And then next slide. Also just kind of updating the language about how a major service change is defined. And so kind of the existing language at the top. So really just adding a little bit more nuance to how a major service change is explained. But really just kind of like language edit. And then the last thing that I mentioned sort of at the top of the meeting was one of our goals is also going to be to just reorganize the document and maybe sort of simplify it and add a little bit more of some graphic elements to make it easier to read. And that's something that we will present sort of after colleagues all your back and that we can share in January.
We have a couple questions, Claire and then Rob.
So when you went through the peer things you talked about, stop amenities, you don't have any recommendations to change anything on that?
Nothing major. I think LTD was sort of like slightly higher so there was like the bench placement and the shelter placement. LTD is kind of in line with peers on the shelter placement, maybe slightly higher on the benches. I think most of them wanted to see sort of around 10 boardings per day, and LTD is at 15, so could bring it down, but didn't feel like
But why?
Yeah.
Why would we want to do less if we don't have to?
Other way around. So,
Robin,
Go ahead.
wait, hold on a second.
sorry,
Good.
just to make sure we're clear, so it's boardings per hour, right?
Yeah.
So our threshold, we require more boardings to install a seat than some of the other entities. Just
Oh, so you have
So
a higher
we have a
standard
little
before
higher
you put,
right, so we require a few more.
I see, okay.
boardings.
So
It's not,
I was interpreting it the opposite way.
I just wanna make sure we're.
Yes, thank you. So, yes, do better.
Mine is related to that.
It was not related?
It is related.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. I liked that you said that one of the peer providers that you looked at included the use around, or the land use there, I guess. I think that would be worth looking at. I mean, if there's, you know, a retirement community nearby, the threshold be lowered so that people who really need it could have a place to sit.
I think if I could respond to that just briefly, when we're hearing the presentation, I think one of the points that Paul made was some other agencies such as TriMet have done some more work in that area in terms of both equity analysis and the land use analysis. I would say that's the direction we want to go, and that's one of my goals for the long range plan when we get into that, is to really take a closer look at like how we can bring more equity analysis or the land use analysis into all of our work. And the service policy is one place where that can end up. I don't think we have the time or the scope to do some of that foundational work with this particular update, but I think it's somewhere for sure that we can go. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Well, the bus stop balancing methodology does sort of gets into that direction. It is, again, it's a methodology. We haven't run it for all the routes. but it does consider land use as part of that. And it kind of takes a pretty detailed, focused look at each individual site. And, again, the goal is kind of like, as Ashley was saying, if you're sort of looking at balancing the number of bus stops on the route, you want to provide access, of course, but sometimes if there's too many and they're too close to each other, the bus is much slower. So it's kind of that, but bringing in land use and bringing in even some of the equity considerations, I think is another, could be the next step to that. So we were planning to reference that in this document, but that's kind of a separate piece of, it's kind of a technical piece to evaluate individual routes and does account for land use. So I think that's maybe something to build on as for the long range plan too.
So as you're building on that, when we do the next iteration of the policy manual, we're going to be able to add those pieces into it, because it's the work that we're actually kind of working on. Policy manual isn't necessarily aspirational for what we want to do, but it's what we're currently doing right now, right? So there's reference to it, and then once we get into the weeds, the policy will help us know how to make the decisions that we need to be making and keep it consistent. So it's helpful. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you very much. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm a little sorry. I've got two general suggestions in response to your draft. If this were, say, a regional transportation plan, there's a hierarchy of goals, objectives, policies, key performance measures, targets. Looking at the draft document, it feels like this is detached. I'm not seeing how this connects to some broader sort of what LTD is trying to do, those goals and objectives and policies. And maybe that document doesn't exist right now.
Well, I'll respond. Or unless you.
No, that's the point.
I mean, this is our service policy.
Yeah.
It really is supposed to be for performance monitoring purposes.
I get that. So just in the document though, kind of connected to,
For sure.
why is this performance measure? What does it relate to what LTD is trying to do as an organization?
Yeah, and
And just make those connections or references if you add that to the document. And maybe that's change it with the long range transit plan coming in.
I mean, that was one of my objectives for this project, and we talked about it, like the graphical elements, and that, I mean, if you look at the service policy right now, it's not an easy document to read for a person.
It is here though.
It does speak to it a little bit, but I think we're gonna have a much more clear document that spells that out better. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
And the second recommendation, which I made before, is just connect this to plain English, to whoever if it's the riders, it's the taxpayers. I mean, kind of explain in non-technical, non-LTD language, what does this mean?
I wonder if the graphical elements might have some of that too, as we're like, so that might tell the story. So.
Do you have a question on?
Yes, good.
Thank you.
Online?
Hi, Alma. Hey, this is Jameson.
Hey, Jameson.
I appreciate the conversation. One thing I'd point out is this is a predominantly internal document for allocation of resources. The language is technical because the work is technical. We'll have a public-facing document that speaks to how we make decisions as well. But I want to point out that the work is technical work. We can't get around that. And we have to have measures in place to understand how each route's performing. So it does tie to how we plan to move forward, but we have to have productivity measures in by each route and each category so we know what's working and how to shift out, allocate resources in the right ways. The end product to the customer is it all builds into better service, these measures and other measures that are not included here. So thanks for your comments.
Thanks, Jameson. Paul and Ashley. Oh, you had your hand up. Sorry. Good.
I had a question about the measuring on-time performance. When I think of I'm riding the bus and the delays that I experience, there's the type that's measured in this chart where the bus is running late, there's traffic, had to grab a bike or something. But there's also excessive padding. When the bus gets to the station early and then you have to wait 5 to 10 minutes before it's supposed to leave, especially on the MX at night. This is a big issue where you have to hang out for 5 to 10 minutes at a lot of the time points. Do any of the agencies you look at measure excessive padding and delay from padding? Because the fact that we are so much better on-time performance is great, but might show that maybe we have more padding than other agencies and we're introducing delay to our riders through that.
We didn't look at
We
that.
did not look at that. I mean, maybe some of the LTD staff might want to respond to this. I think that could potentially be a scheduling thing in terms of how buses are allocated, how operators are managed throughout the network, but I don't know if.
Yeah, I mean, we look at it for each bid, go through each route individually, look at the adherence and dwelling and all of that, try to adjust it. We do have some of that in there, just kind of like catch-up points, or like, you know, if something happens, there's a little bit of a cushion in there. But we definitely look at it each bid.
Yeah, I just noticed with the clock face scheduling of the EMX, the padding that might be appropriate during the day becomes a little excessive and
Yeah, I mean, we can look at that again.
Okay, all right. I think that's all from us. I mean, thank you everybody for all the great comments.
No, I think that's it. Yeah, thank you for all your comments. Like we said, we're gonna be kind of incorporating everything into a design version of that we'll share with you all in January, so.
Awesome.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate you. All right. Moving into fare system roadmap region.
Right, fare system roadmap. So before I get started, I wanted to give a thanks to Carrie who helped me put together this great display of some of our old fare media. So sorry for those who are not in the room with us tonight. However, I think Brianna took a picture. You're gonna put that up on the screen for us. So we just wanted to sort of capture a little bit of history around our different fare payment methods. So if you have a chance, maybe after the meeting, check this out. You'll see a bunch of tokens from different eras, Grateful Dead concert passes, youth passes, all sorts of things. So take a look at that. And I also put a copy of our fare policy up there. That's kind of an important document we all should know about. And then finally, there's actually one of our spare validators. This is something that we have on all of our vehicles now. So this is sort of a more modern way to pay fares with either a touch pass or your smartphone using the UMO app on this device. So after the meeting. So go ahead and get started on the presentation.
Are you allowed to take a picture of that?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I just want to make sure I could.
Yeah, no privacy concerns. I don't think, right, Barry? Okay. Yeah, take a picture and maybe we'll leave this up for a little while. Maybe we could even add this to our website.
That would be cool.
For this particular project. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. Next slide. Can I use this, Brianna? Does this work?
It should.
All right, so I've mentioned this before in some of our updates, but I'll be presenting tonight on what we're calling our fare system roadmap. And this is a project that I've been working on with Cosette Pease, our mobility services director, for the last few months. And I just wanted to provide an update with you and share some information on where we've been and where we're going, or where we think we're going in terms of fare payment systems at LTD. And it's a fairly complicated beast with a lot of different elements that we're going to be thinking about. So a little bit about the project context. So the goal here is to develop a strategic roadmap that'll guide us in evolving our fare system to better align with future objectives, customer needs, and emerging technologies. So this is sort of, this process can be broken down into 4 phases. So the first phase was evaluating our fare current system and market. Number 2 is defining the system objectives and requirements. Phase 3, which is sort of where we're at right now, we're just wrapping up, is to identify and assess options for moving forward. And then phase 4 will be a final report. And we do have a consultant team who's working on this for us. And right now they are drafting the final report to bring back to you and the board. I think we're planning to bring this forward in the new year. So the recapping, the initial part of this was the assessment. So these are some of the findings from the consulting who helped us with this. Number one, our current system is inconsistent and creates an inequitable rider experience across services. So our fare rules and benefits, for example, fare capping, so the maximum amount of money you might pay in a month for paying for transit fares, don't carry across all Lane County area services. So we're thinking more broadly as the mobility manager within Lane County of not just LTD services, but Link Lane, for example, also Diamond Express, Rhodey Express, the Cottage Grove Connector, all of these services. There's no time-based transfer window across services. Riders who pay with cash or paper miss the opportunity for the best fare. So if you participate in an electronic fare payment, you have access to some of these fare capping rules, which you don't get if you're paying with cash. We have aging and unreliable hardware. So that includes the validator I just showed you. This is an older model that's not even produced anymore. And it's kind of slow and it doesn't offer open payment options. You can't pay with your phone or your credit card on this particular validator, which we have across all of our buses. Similarly, our ticket vending machines on the MX platforms are very old, no longer supported by the manufacturer, starting to be pretty unreliable. And they require people to put in coins or cash to get their tickets. And they're not connected to accounts. So again, if you're using those machines, you're not getting fare capping benefits or anything like that. Limited data and system integration. So our system right now doesn't connect very well with our internal tools, such as through finance or other internal tracking tools. And then again, integration with partner mobility services are limited, although we are taking some steps to make improvements in that space right now. And then finally, diffuse ownership and operational gaps. So the responsibility for fares and systems is spread across teams, but within LTD and outside of LTD. Cash handling is a manual process it's difficult to track and it creates a lot of work for us. Once we did this initial evaluation, we met with a group of multiple groups of stakeholders. We had several focus groups earlier this year. We met with LTD staff, so operations, IT, finance, customer service, marketing. We met with our municipal and nonprofit partners, so City of Eugene, Springfield, St. Vincent de Paul, other nonprofits. We also did a separate nonprofit survey. And one of the reasons we are working with our nonprofits is because that's how we distribute our low-income passes through our nonprofit partners. So they were a really important group of folks to talk to. Schools, LCC, Bethel, 4J, Springfield School Districts, University of Oregon, Cascadia Mobility, the bike share operator, and Lane Council of Governments, the operator of Link Lane. Key themes from these stakeholder meetings, we were really focusing on trying to understand desired outcomes, both from the user perspective, the rider perspective, and then from the agency perspective. And so these are broken out into these 5 categories. So affordability and equity. So we should try to provide the most affordable fare no matter how people pay, provide fare capping for all users, and then making sure we're considering vulnerable populations. Simplicity and usability, paying your fare should be as easy as buying a cup of coffee. That's something we heard from numerous folks. You should be able to just use your phone or your card to tap and pay. And I think that really helps out-of-town folks or tourists who come to our town if they want to use transit, just to make it as simple as possible, where you don't have to download an app or anything like that. Okay. Reducing barriers, clear or more clear communications around our fare system, fare payments, technology and system efficiency. So right now the back end is inefficient, something we hear from our youth pass users and other entities. So we want to improve things there. The QR code validators are challenging. That validator right there has a little camera on it, and if you've ever used the Yumo app, you know it's kind of tough to line up your app and the QR codes that it reads this. There's a delay that's built into the system and frustration there. Service integration, there's interest in a unified fare and multimodal travel. So again, creating that more seamless experience across all services. People don't want to manage multiple apps necessarily to pay their fares, so reducing the number of apps you have to use. And then finally, safety, and this is related to fare evasion concerns. So making sure that you know, we set up a system that just makes it as easy as possible to pay to try to reduce fare evasion, as opposed to having a really heavy hand on the public safety side of things. So how can we make the system just work better so people don't feel like they have to evade fares? So I talked about sort of the early set of objectives, the refined objectives after we had these focus groups come down to number one, creating the best price for every rider every time. Number two, make payment simple and predictable. Number three, one connected journey across services. So again, making that connection across all the different services. And then making it reliable and efficient both for riders, users, and for the administrators of the system. So the following are the key system requirements that we've come up with to meet these objectives. So number one is to allow for open account-based payments. So this would allow for credit or debit cards, mobile wallets, and flexible accounts that would include access to these discounted rates or fare capping and rolling passes. Validator compatibility, we know that if we want to introduce open account-based payments, we're going to need to upgrade our validators. These just don't work for payments. Simple fare structure, so just reducing the number of different types of fares that we have out there, and fare media, and just simplifying the process there. Data and mobility integration, so I missed integrated programs and eligibility. So we know that there's work we can do to improve, for example, our group pass program and our youth pass, and that's something built into our investments here. Data and mobility integration, so better linkage both for LTD's back-end accounting systems as well as our partners partner with. Retail and cash to digital access. So, you know, if we are moving to a future where, you know, there is a goal of trying to maybe reduce the amount of cash we're having to handle on the bus, but we don't want to eliminate the need or the ability to pay with cash. So we might see other opportunities to pay with cash, just not necessarily as much on the bus itself. So working with retail outlets and those sorts of things to be able to add value to your account or your card. And then finally, reliability and security. Strong privacy and clear governance is really what this comes down to for the next system. So our consultant group helped us do some mapping of system requirements to objectives. So on the vertical side over here on the left, you'll see our system requirements mapped against the different objectives that I talked about earlier. And you can see that we're hitting multiple objectives on some of these system requirements here. All right, so the last piece of work we did internally is we held a workshop about a month ago, and we walked through what our proposed fare system options are to meet these different objectives going forward. And you'll see there's 4 different options here. Number one, maintain status quo, essentially do nothing and just keep using the system we have. We do have a contract in place for our current system right now that goes through, I think, May of 27. And then, you know, the problem with the maintain status quo is that it doesn't allow us to hit any of these objectives that I talked about. So The next one is to optimize the current system. So basically stay with our current contract and but begin to upgrade some key pieces such as some of the hardware validators and TVMs that will allow us to start to meet some of these objectives earlier on in the process. Number 3 is just to basically abandon the system we have today and put out an RFP for a whole new, entirely different system. This would be a competitive RFP process. This would in itself be a large project that would be fairly resource intensive to take on. And then number 4 would be to join a multi-region fare collection system. So this is something we explored a little bit, and the only real viable option here is to potentially join in with TriMet and C-Tran and use the hop card. There's some issues with that in terms of it takes away a lot of our local control, and it doesn't really create a regional system because we're far enough away from TriMet that it just doesn't make a lot of sense to necessarily go that direction. And then the 5th option was described in text below is to basically just use an open architecture, build your own system, which is kind of what TriMet did with the hop card. But we are not of the sophistication to take that on, and we know that, so that's not an option for us. The proposal that we're leaning towards right now is a blended approach between 2 and 3. So we want to be able to enable some of this functionality around open payments and fare capping and some of these new tools. And we can start working on that now. And then within the next couple of years, we would go for the potential for a new platform. So we would do a competitive RFP process. And the timing of that is such that there could be some new innovations that come out in the next few years, so we'll be able to take advantage of those. We know that the investments that we would make right now under this number 2 really are related to validators and TVMs. And the objective with the early investments would be to buy open architecture hardware that works for any different system out there. So we're not basically buying something that would be obsolete with the new system, if that makes sense. These are the evaluation criteria that we use to land on that blended 2 and 3 approach. So thinking about financial implications, so what's the upfront and ongoing cost, training, communications publicly, because this is going to require a lot of communications to get people educated about the new system. Risk management, so service continuity, even things like what do we do with all the stored value that we have today with our current system, and how does that transfer over to a new system? So that there's a lot of moving pieces to this. Data integrity, reliability, privacy concerns. Control and oversight, again, something I mentioned before, system integration, scalability. So how we connect the back end accounting tools with our existing systems, and then how we work with our partners to also account for the back end requirements. And then requirements alignment, so ability to deliver and align with the range of system requirements. We know we have a lot of things that we want to do, so we need to be very selective with how we move forward, so we're not eliminating the possibility to hit a certain objective. I kind of jumped the gun by sharing that we were blending option 2 and 3, but you can see this is the preliminary assessment of options, and this is in your packet, so I'm not going to go through all this detail because we're running a little bit behind, but you can sort of see where these things score on the different criteria and how we landed on the blended 2-3 approach. Yeah, so preliminary comparisons, option 1, as I said, status quo, it keeps the cost low, but it doesn't advance our objectives. It doesn't help us get to the future. The speed and low exchange risk is option number 2. So we can make some of these upgrades with our current system. We can start doing that now. And we do actually have some CIP dollars programmed to help this work. So this is something we can actually move pretty quickly on. Best long-term control and flexibility, as I mentioned, is option 3. So this would be putting out a competitive RFP for a new system, and we will do that sort of at the end of the lifespan of our current contract. But I should mention that it's quite possible that we end up with the same vendor. That's within the realm of possibility through a competitive process. And then finally, the regional integration one. It just doesn't feel like the right move for us, particularly because of the loss of political control if we were to jump onto the hop card system. Right, so what does that mean? I already mentioned it. Replacement of validators. This is going to be one of the key first investments that we make is to buy new validators. And this would be validators for all of our vehicles as well as Link Lane, our contracted services, Ride Source, the Cottage Grove connector. So we'd all have the same hardware on those services, and then investment in new ticket vending machines. What you'll likely see is a vast reduction in the number of ticket vending machines on our MX platforms. Probably somewhere in the range of like 10 or so out in the system at key locations, but then adding outdoor validators to the platforms. You could actually pay with your phone or your card or your account that way. Continue to support customers reliant on cash, again, not abandoning cash payment. Management of student and group pass programs. So we've heard some really good feedback from our participants, and I think there's some improvements we can make there early on. And then a future step will be fare policy updates. So we do have a copy of our fare policy there, and it's on our website as well. That would be a follow-up that we probably take on starting in about a year or so to look at our fare policy and how some of the hardware changes could enable changes to our fare policy to allow us to these things like fare capping and different discount rates and that sort of thing. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little disheartened to hear option 4 kind of dismissed that quickly. Like Hop's fare system is amazing for every type of user. Like for students, you have your tap to pay in your student ID. For people without access to banks, you can go to any Winco, any grocery store, any convenience store and load cash. For occasional users, you can tap to pay with your phone. And like if we worked with ODOT, like potentially we could get this in all of Oregon. We could, you know, California has it where you can pay with Amtrak with your card, and maybe we could do that too. And like this could be the beginning of a statewide Oregon card. Like, and I heard this phrase like local control mentioned a few times, but could you explain like why that's so critical and why that is more important than like the rider experience?
I should clarify that all of the things that you brought up are things that we can accomplish locally. So student pass printed on student IDs, we can do that. We've talked about doing that and we want to do that. Low income options where you can load your card at any grocery store. We actually, I don't think this is common knowledge, you can actually do that at, I don't know how many locations here. It's like at least 30 or 40 locations where you can add value to your UMO card right now. We just don't advertise it very well. So all of the things that you brought up are things that we can accomplish locally without having to have the additional burden of going through TriMet to talk about fare changes, or if we want to change our fare policy, we have to work with TriMet to do that. There are some significant disadvantages that would slow a lot of things down by doing that.
There are already multiple transit agencies on the Hop card.
Just C-Tran and TriMet. And C-Tran is, from what I heard, they're not loving the situation.
Okay. Got it.
So again, we can accomplish everything that you brought up with our own system.
Yeah, just one Oregon card would be amazing.
Yeah. No, and we are taking a lot of inspiration. You mentioned the California example. There's Caltrans has a program called Cal ITP, and a lot of the ideas that we're introducing for this are based off the Cal ITP work. In fact, a lot of the research our consultants are doing for us are utilizing Cal ITP resources. So we are thinking about that type of system. And I will say, these are conversations because that I have had recently. ODOT has they're interested in this. I think we can take kind of a leadership role now without having to wait for ODOT to move things forward. So, yeah, hopefully that helps.
That does, thank you.
Yeah.
Paul, then Scooter.
Great. Two questions on the recommendations. One, you mentioned for fair policy updates, you're thinking about a 1-year timeline.
I don't know exactly when we'll get to it, but it's probably within the next year we would start looking at fair policy.
Do you have timelines or rough estimates on the other recommendations?
We'd like to get moving on this quick. The number one thing is the purchase of the hardware and the TVMs. That's kind of the first thing that we need to do.
Okay. And then my second question on the recommendations. So those first two recommendations, replacement of validators, investing in the ticketing vending machines, like it's very clear to me what the action is there.
Yeah.
The second two bullet points, support customers relying on cash and management of student and group pass programs. It's less clear to me what the action is or what is going to happen. Can you elaborate on those two?
Yeah, one of the things is like just an example of the cash item is the example that Peter brought up where you can go load value to your card at a number of different locations. We actually have that in place right now, but we don't advertise it. And we don't really work very closely with those partners where you can do that. And so we want to build a marketing effort around that so that people actually know that they can load value to their cards by going to these vendors. So 7-Eleven stores in Eugene Springfield, you can actually go load value to your TouchPass, but I don't think we can do that regularly because they're so busy. Yeah. The other piece that I would say sort of links up with that is our low income programs. That's going to take more work to design. So I'm hesitant to say exactly what that looks like now because that's going to be an effort in itself. But where we'd like to go is to try to get away from distributing paper day passes to our subsidized like low income providers and potentially go to a mobile wallet model, which is something that came out of Cal ITP. It's work that was done more recently down in the LA area where we can provide, we can work with organizations to provide prepaid debit cards or preloaded debit cards that are SKU limited that can only be used for transportation services. And that way, you're creating an opportunity for people who are unbanked or underbanked to get access to the financial system through transportation and transit. So these are some of the areas that we want to go. It's going to take us some time to get there. The most tangible things on this list are the validators and TVMs. Those are just kind of easy things that they're not easy necessarily, but we know we have to do them right away. Yeah. So,
do you have some additional examples of what management of student and group pass programs might look like?
So I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation. We've done some of this initial work with the focus groups, and I think we need to continue working with University of Oregon, LCC, 4J, Bethel to really figure out, for example, with the K through 12 schools in particular, we know there's a lot of administrative hassle with the UMO cards, the TouchPass cards, and getting students on to that system. We've already identified some ways that we can streamline that. We've already actually started to do some of that, but I think ideally a future system would be able to integrate a student ID card with the transit pass again. And you'll see, we used to do that with stickers. Now we have to do that electronically, and we're just not quite aligned yet. But I think we can get there. With U of O Group Pass, I don't know exactly yet. We know that there's work to do, and I think an ideal future scenario would be maybe a transportation or like package or something like that, so that we're not having to do like LTDs, not having to go to ASUO separately from Cascadia Mobility every year to try to renew this pass. There's some risk in that for us. So I think that's an area that we need to work with, like University of Oregon in particular, to try to figure out a different solution.
Would there be any consideration to integrate the pass with the student ID or the faculty ID cards?
I think there's opportunities to do that. I mean, it sounds like it technically is an easy thing to do, but then getting two agencies together to agree to that.
Right. we further be interested in that.
So I'm gonna be mindful of time. Scooter, next, and then we're gonna move on after Scooter's question around this topic.
Forgive me if I'm a little outdated on my info, but at least on my end as a writer, as I understand it, I could use at the moment a touch card or my UMO app, and they're not connected in any way really to the same account. Is that correct or no?
Is it connected to the same account in the back end?
Right.
Because you have to pick one or the other. They don't let you scan a QR code or use the card for the same account.
That's right.
Okay. I was wondering if any of these, like myriads of different solutions that will be available, different ways to pay and stuff, would be, if there would be an option to connect multiple ways to pay to your account. Because just as an example,
Yeah.
I haven't been in the meetings in person a couple of times now, but I'm a wheelchair user. And if it's raining, I have to bury my phone in pockets and I have to try and get myself up the ramp. And then I have to hold on to a thing. And then I have to somehow magically get another hand and get my phone out to put up, and hold it to the camera. If I could just do a card that was connected to the passes that I have on my app, that would be great. But at this point, it sounds like I have to pick one or the other. And it's like, yeah, I have it currently on my app. What if my phone dies? I'm just kind of out of luck.
Yeah, no, those are great points, Scooter. And I think the intent is to simplify things. If it was a single account based option, and I know Peter brought this up, as a UVO student, I don't know how it works for all of the different pass users. You do have to choose, but there should be a way where we can link to a single account once we go to more of an account-based system. So
that would be option. That would be awesome.
Yeah, you would still get the user card.
This is an exciting conversation. I really appreciate that we have this aspirational North Star that we're working toward, and we will get to just the baby steps and the low-hanging fruit where things are using too many cliches right now. But yeah, the opportunity that we have right now. So I appreciate the time that staff's put into that. Any closing remarks about this topic?
Yeah, so we're getting the final deliverable from our consultant team right now, hopefully in the next month or so, and then we plan on introducing this to the board in the new year. So more input to come.
Thank you, Dave. All right, moving on to our equitable engagement policy briefing.
Good evening. I'm Brandon Melton, Senior Planner here at LTD. I'm going to talk to you about the equitable engagement policy. That's great. So talk about the purpose of the policy, the applicability, and then some details around the policy. This picture is actually from the COCA process. Some of you were here for that, some not. I'm going to try to get the acronym right. It's the Community Outreach and Communications Assessment is what COCA stands for. And so part of that was developing a community advisory committee. And so you can see here, it's a committee that brought a lot of diversity to the conversation. And that process was all about bringing more people to the table and getting in touch with the community and how the community wants to hear from LTD and the best ways to reach out to them. So as part of that, there was a pilot to offer stipends to allow for more diversity in that engagement. And it was really successful. And so this policy was developed to support that and to, I guess, codify it in a way so that we can continue to do that. And we intend to use it for the Connect 2045 Long Range Mobility Plan update, informing that community advisory committee. So really it reflects the LTD's commitment to equitable, sustainable, and community responsive transportation, reduces barriers to participation. I think that's the big one. And then we want to make sure that we're getting a variety of community voices to guide decisions. The stipends recognize the participants' time, knowledge, and lived experience, and really align with our core values of equity, being inclusive, respect, for valuing those contributions, and then collaboration to strengthen partnerships with a variety of folks. Applicability, so we do have to set some guide rails, so we're looking at guardrails, project advisory committees, task force and forces, and then eligible engagement activities, looking at about a 6-month time period or more. And then we don't want people showing up getting paid for something else, that we're gonna put the nix on that. But we're limiting to ad hoc project-based time-limited committees, excluding LTD board and standing committees and subcommittees. Sorry, that excludes you all, but we have to draw the line somewhere.
We get paid.
Yeah, exactly. So the stipends are offered to reduce those financial barriers, honor those community commitments. Some other eligibility requirements in the policy. We're trying to, again, set those guardrails. So about an hour meeting lasting more than 6 months. I already explained the compensation. We want people to be living and working in the county. And then there's some financial information that we'll need to gather, banking info, but we have talked about some exceptions potentially for underbanked and unbanked individuals that we can deal with on a case-by-case basis. But the actual stipend amount is about $50 per meeting or $25 an hour is what we're targeting. And then they have to be there for the full meeting with some exceptions. So that's in a nutshell what we're trying to get at, and then we'll be taking this to the board.
Yeah, I'm glad that you got to pilot this and see the benefit from providing the stipend and really expanding the depth and breadth of who then can show up. So this is super exciting, really good work. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Anything else? All right, cool.
Thank you. This is great. Make it accessible. That was a speed record presentation for us. So, great job. Let's see. Anything else from anyone? Questions? Wonderful. Well,
Can you remind us what comes next? I think there was a discussion on that at the beginning while I was getting situated and just.
from the equitable.
No, for SBC. Our next meeting is in January.
So we're doing a tour, and my proposal was that we cancel our January meeting date and have a brief meeting after.
Okay.
My proposal, and I think we can follow up with that.
Got it. The 18th?
On the 18th. Okay. Is that right?
I think.
I believe it's the 15th.
Oh,
Yeah.
the 15th?
Yeah, I was gonna
I'm
say,
sorry.
I think it was Saturday,
Thursday.
but I figured we'd get the right.
You guys don't want to meet on
Thursday the
Thursday?
15th. I mean, that actually worked better for me, but
Right?
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. We will call adjournment at 7:22. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.